Hello, New Hope family. Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Strunz, and I'm thrilled to have Pastor Mark with me today. We're dedicated to helping you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. Thank you for joining us. Well, New Hope family, welcome back. This is episode number 155, and I'm Adam, and once again, I'm with Pastor Mark. This is Pastor Mark's last episode with us, as he has completed his interim here at New Hope. So, this is episode 155, like I said, and today we're going to be discussing out of Mark chapter 2, verses
18 to 22,
18 to 22. In my notes here, I wrote down 18 to 12. That doesn't
work real well. Unless I can read backwards.
Right.
And I didn't, no, that doesn't work.
I looked down and thought, that's not how the Bible works.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Mark 2, 18 through 22. So, great message. Just a little feedback. Right after service, a lot of people loved the message, thought it was a phenomenal message. One lady even said it was the best message she's ever heard. So It was very impactful. I'm not, between you and I'm not usually the person to say, hey, great message. Just because I know it can seem like pandering sometimes. Mm-hmm. But,
well, it is the only profession that I know of where the speaker goes back to the door to wait, and you have to shake his hand and tell him you did a good job before you can get out.
Right.
It just kind of seems that's the way church works.
Exactly. When I gave my first sermon ever, so I was doing my internship, just about done with my degree, and I gave a sermon, and it was on Jonah. And I got to the back, and an older gentleman came back, and he said, maybe your next one will be better.
Oh, that's brutal.
I thought to myself, maybe I won't do another one. No.
Could be the end of this.
But no, that will always be very funny to me. But you're right, it is very difficult. But I don't know, it's been fun doing the podcast with you. I'm excited to see what Pastor Aaron will bring in the next couple weeks.
Yeah.
We're going to look at having a couple testimonies and change it up for 2 weeks. Then we'll jump in with Pastor Aaron. Mm-hmm. So things are going to be changing. And that leads us into what the sermon was about today.
Exactly.
Give us a little recap for those that didn't maybe make it or listen to it. What was the sermon about today? And maybe why that?
Well, we are obviously in a change period, and so that is significant. For the most part, people don't handle change well. At least we say, boy, I don't like this. I don't like things to change. Mm-hmm. And so address the idea of traditions, comfort zone preferences, things that we just do and we get in that pattern and we like it because it's not risky. It's just very comfortable. And when change is forced upon us, we often don't like that. Often it comes with negative things that happen. You get fired from a job, and what's good about that? That kind of thing. So it's dealing with change when it comes our way, and about how God works through changes and initiates those changes, and it is valuable because it helps us to grow.
Mm-hmm. So in the Bible text, Jesus is being challenged by some teachers of the law.
Pharisees.
Yeah, the Pharisees. And they don't like that he and his disciples are not fasting when everybody else is fasting, and he should know the rule that everybody's fasting, and this is the time to fast. And Jesus says to them, they will fast eventually, but they shouldn't be doing it right now when I'm with them. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting takeaway for me. That was my first takeaway. Okay, so why that? Why is it important that Jesus was with them? And what was the important piece that they don't need to do it when I'm here? Mm-hmm. And then secondary, the takeaway was when you mentioned the 70s and the microwave coming out, I thought to myself, oh, wow, the 70s. Yeah, that was a while ago. Then I was reminded that I could do the same sermon you just did about the 90s, and people would feel the same way.
Yep.
And I'm old enough now that people don't remember anything even when I was a young adult. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, I'm not as young as I was either. And so, but first, why Why was it important that Jesus pointed out to the Pharisees that while I'm here, they don't need to do these things?
Well, what he was talking about, he refers to himself, uses the metaphor as a bridegroom.
Yeah.
And so this is like a wedding. This is feast time. And it gave permission that there are times when fasting is inappropriate. It's not needed at that point, which I think is just really good to see the seasons that God does in our lives.
Yep.
That there are times of feasting, and that's not the time to be mourning or to fasting or whatever, that there are times of just rejoicing, and don't feel guilty about that. Go do it. And as long as Jesus was with them, they were like the best men, the groomsmen, and this isn't the time to be fasting, but there will be a time, and he says, yeah, I'm not against fasting.
Right.
It just doesn't need to be right now, which is one of the things that happens with our traditions and our preferences is it has to be done the same way all the time. And anybody that comes in and starts messing that up and changing that up, it's like they're against the God things in our life.
Yep.
Because that's what the Pharisees were thinking. You're not serving God right because this is the way we do fasting. And, the timing of it and everything, that was their own makeup. That wasn't God said you need to do it this way at this time. They had just developed that pattern. That's what they always did. It's what anybody did. John's disciples, who certainly were not Pharisees or hypocrites or anything, they did fasting on a regular basis. It's what everybody did because it was a tradition. And Jesus has just a way of breaking up those traditions and saying, yeah, fasting is important. And there will be a time when they will fast after I have left. But right now, it's not the time for that.
I think I run into that. So I come out of a church background that you offer baptism every single service that you hold, and every service that you hold, you have take communion together.
Yeah.
And that just isn't commonplace. And so there's things like that you grow accustomed to and like. And so
it just feels wrong if you don't do it that way.
Yeah. And so I have this weird combination of I almost feel guilty that we don't do communion. I'll use that example. That we don't do communion when we get together. But I have to also recognize that I don't need to come in and blast you about that.
Yeah. Well, we had someone attending our church that started a few months ago, and his family is missionary, so very church background, and comes from a denomination similar to that, where communion was served every Sunday, and we do it just once a month.
Right.
And he asked me, he says, why don't you do this every Sunday? And the only answer that I had is tradition.
Yep.
This isn't a God thing.
Nope.
It's just a tradition. This is what we've always done, and you've always done it that way. We've always done it this way. Neither one is right or wrong. It's not a God thing. It's a tradition thing. Yep. The God part of it is glorifying Him, of remembering Him, the communion aspect, of including God in our lives, remembering what He's done for us. That's the God part that we need to do on a regular basis. How and when things are done, just like baptism. That's why in the Wesleyan Church, our denomination, it doesn't matter to us how you are baptized. There are different modes of baptism.
Right.
Immersion, where you go completely under the water. Sprinkling, where water is just placed on your head. Pouring, where water is poured over. Different churches do it different ways. And we say the wineskins, the structure, the mode, doesn't matter. It's what the commitment that you're making in that. And that's what the message was about, is let's make sure that we are doing these things for the glory of God, and not just because it's tradition or because it's part of our comfort and preference.
I just want to stop right now and just say, go and watch this sermon, because we can't touch on everything that's said in it, and it really is worth your while. And go make sure you watch it if you haven't, or rewatch it also. I think it's worth taking a look at. I think something you mentioned also in the message was about doctrine and how application of doctrine. I think for people that go to Bible college, especially, we get taught our doctrines and like our doctrines. And when we're younger, and I feel weird saying that, although my beard is gray, I do think we tie into that, and it kind of gives us some kind of value that we have that. And gives us like our character and maybe even part of our ego likes that.
If I'm right, I feel good about myself. Yeah. So if I'm sure I've got the right way and my church is the right one, even though the others are going to heaven too, and they're good Christians, but we've got the details all figured out. And that's the way I remember as a young man. Boy, I could argue with people from other believers from other denominations that have some different doctrines, not the essential ones, just secondary doctrines. And I remember arguing with them. And now with age, it's like, that's so dumb. Yeah. I don't have it all figured out, and my denomination doesn't have it all figured out. And God can work with us in different ways. And I don't have to prove to anybody that I'm right and they're wrong.
In Youth for Christ, where I work, we are multi-denominational. Everybody's there. Even on our team, we have people. I go to this church. We have an Assembly of God. We have Lutheran. We have, very fundamentalist Baptist. And so it's this big group of people. When we get in a room and we're trying to write curriculum together, you can't tie yourself to tradition. The work will never get done. And so I watch younger staff have that pruned in their life, maybe is the way I would say it. And it is painful.
Yeah.
And it touches on what you talked about today. Are they willing to change to the point where it's the lordship to Jesus more important than what they know?
Right.
The more important than being correct. And I feel that tension every time we teach about Jesus and the Pharisees kind of having a moment together and talking like this in this one, where they're trying to say, hey, how can you do that? And he's like, listen, if you understood it better, you wouldn't even be questioning me. And when we're in a conversation with God and he's saying, wait, when you understand it better, you won't be behaving this way. But it's so painful to us, Mark, that change, that pruning. And I just don't like it.
Yep.
When I was called into ministry, my first thought was, I don't think so. And so as you face change again, as you're changing and transitioning, do you feel a little of that angst still?
I feel some of that, mostly in relation to what matters the most. The people matter, not the structure, not the organization. And so leaving people is always hard. But God has wired me, and I didn't realize this till I got into interim pastoral ministry. He has wired me to like change and to jump into new situations and be able to walk out of situations. I didn't know I could do that. My ministry up to that point was at least 8 years in one church as a pastor, and usually longer than that. But I discovered I actually like change. There's some angst to it, but it's mostly relations to people. I just enjoy these people, and I'm going to miss them. But jumping into a new situation is kind of exciting for me. Now, my wife is not the same way.
Okay.
She does not like all this change, and that's why she, at this point, doesn't go with me full-time into the places where I go. She has a good support system in our home base with family and taking care of grandkids, which is really important to her. And that change every year is hard for her. But for me, for the most part, I kind of like it.
You have a ministry experience. You've been doing it for a long time. Was there a season, was there a time when you thought, I don't want this change that's coming?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. My last long-term pastorate, I left, I would say, you could say it was under a cloud. They were not happy with me. Some decisions that I felt I had to make that they didn't like. And so there was a separation, kind of like a Paul and Barnabas disagreeing on ministry and needing to separate. We separated, and the way that happened, I felt hurt. I felt like I was not treated well. And at that point, I didn't even want to go back to church ever again. I certainly would did not think I would ever pastor another church because I just was so hurt. And that's not to judge the people that did it. It's just saying the way that it happened, I felt judged, whether I felt hurt by the whole thing. And that's not a blame on them. It's just the circumstances. It's just what happened. But that is what forced me into looking at interim pastoral work, which I'd never thought of doing before, had no desire to do that before. But I was suddenly like, I'm out of work. And I mean, I looked at secular work, I look at whatever. I don't know what I want to do. And that a door opened up for me to do an interim work. And so since 2011, so the last 13 years, that's what I've been doing, and discovered this just really fits who I am. And so in my latter years here, my golden years are really being spent in doing the things that fit me the best. And I would never have known that if God hadn't forced me through a painful situation, a devastating situation that opened up a door to do what I'm doing now.
I would say the same thing for me. It was a big change leaving the church, being a pastor, stepping into Youth for Christ, where, let's say it's not... people don't consider that an equal trade. They consider, like, why did you leave the position everybody wants to go and do something that doesn't pay you? And there's a lot of questions that way. And on top of that, I went from a place where I was very well known and respected, had been a part of Wisconsin Christian Teen Convention, all of these things that were amazing. I was kind of, I'd just say well respected, to a position where no one knows who I am, and the person I'm working for, the founder, thinks I have zero experience. And I went home after that and thought, oh, I have nothing again. I don't like this. And yet now look what's happened. All these years, the planting of 16 ministry sites, the growing ministry, stories and stories of kids coming to faith. We have 3 kids right now that we need to connect with the church for baptism. Like, all these amazing things happen. But I had to be humble. And I had to, even after being humbled, I had to be humbled again and say, no, Lord, it's about you. It's not about me. Would you say that that's what we have to do every time? Or is there like something experientially where we can say, okay, I find myself again. How can we pursue God in those and be mindful? What do you think?
Well, and that's kind of the way that I ended the message, is you can go with your preferences if you don't want Jesus to be Lord. You can go with your traditions, your ways of doing it, if you don't want him to be Lord, because he instructed us that we have to deny ourselves. And in denying ourselves, it's, I'm not handling this, I'm not dealing with this has to be God's, and putting it back in his hands. Every time a new challenge, a new opportunity, new experience comes our way, good or bad, we put that in the Lord's hands going, oh, I don't know how to do this. I need God's help with this. And that keeps us dependent on him, and it keeps him Lord of our lives instead of me running my own life and deciding how I want it all to play out.
One of the biggest fears behind the message you just shared for me is that we'll get talented enough and we'll know enough and we'll have enough finances and have enough abilities naturally. We just have everything that we need to be outrageously successful, and God doesn't need to be any part of it. And the better we get at what we do, the less we need him. And as New Hope, we're good at a lot. We have a lot of excellence in a lot of areas. And sometimes I think there's just this, I'd say the fear. There's a fear for me that we would just not need him. And I appreciate the message today because we do need him, and we need to lean into the parts that are changing and the parts that are new and don't look like we maybe think that they should. What could we do to posture ourselves to get ready for Aaron in a way? You kind of mentioned it in the message at the end, but what could we do to maybe pray or just get ready that he might change a lot? And he might decide, this is kind of the mission and vision I see God leading us in. What do we do with that?
I think praying for him at this point is very significant. I mean, this is just huge. He's making a big life change by moving to Williston. It's uprooting his family. It's uprooting all of their social life, of course, is tied with the church. So they're starting all over again. So praying for them is just absolutely huge in all of that. And I think the second part is just getting a mindset that it's okay for him to change things. Things that we may really like, and I use the illustration of a couple of things that we do here at New Hope. One is we end every service with, we're not leaving the church, we're going to be the church. And everybody says that together at the very end of the service, be the church. And so that's a cool tradition that we do that reminds us that church happens wherever we're going. Well, we're being Jesus to people. But that's the danger of these traditions, is that becomes so cool. And if he comes in and says, oh, we're not going to do that anymore, it's like, you're messing up our church.
Right.
This is important to us. This matters to us. Well, it isn't. It is just part of the wineskins. It's part of the tradition, the structure that we use. We're not changing our mission, but we aren't saying it the same way. And just deciding ahead of time, we give him permission to make the changes that God leads him to make, because they're going to be right for us if he's the chosen man to lead us into the future, which we've all confirmed this is then we need to recognize that if he's saying, I think God's leading us in a direction, that we're not afraid to go that direction and say, okay, let's find that out. Let's go with it and see what God does.
What do you think about the thought that people connect their faith to those traditions? So we have these Pharisees in the teaching, and Jesus addresses them many times throughout the New Testament. The fact is that the tradition is more important than people, but the tradition is also, to an extent, more important than God, because they're not necessarily connecting to God through the tradition anymore. So the activity is now their faith. The religious activity is all they believe in.
And you see this in religious organizations everywhere. I would say it's even available or is there in our church, which I think is doing things right. It's not just the church across town that they just do all these traditions. Well, we all have our traditions. And it is very easy to substitute the traditions for a real relationship with the Lord. Something as simple as daily Bible reading can be substituted for a relationship with the Lord. Now, what I mean by that is you can get in that pattern, and we may have discussed this before, of reading so many chapters a day and feeling like, okay, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing spiritually. I've done my devotions. I've done my Bible reading. But if God's not in that, if I'm just going through the motions, there's some value still in just going through the motions. That's why we take our kids to church. They may not understand it yet, but I want them to get in that pattern, in that tradition, because there's value in it. But it cannot substitute the relationship with Jesus. And I've discovered at times that I'm more interested in checking off the fact that I got through this chapter, that I read through it, than I am, did I really connect with Jesus in these last 5 minutes that I read that chapter? And if I'm doing that activity, then I can fool myself into thinking, yes, I am religious, I am spiritual, because I'm doing spiritual, religious things, and can totally leave Jesus out of the picture. And I think we see that as evangelicals, we see that in some mainline denominations, and we can be very critical of them. They're just going through traditions. But we do the same thing. You know, it's not like, we've got this figured out, and we don't do that. We do the same thing. It's just human nature for all of us to do that.
I have an interesting part of my testimony, which is I started reading the Bible and encountering the Scripture, especially New Testament, Book of Acts, Paul's writings, before I actually attended church that much. And so I read it, and then I read it a second time, and I would say that was like in the first 3 to 5 months of becoming a Christian. And then I started going to church and like encountering the tradition of church and how it ran and what happened, which I was very, unfamiliar with pretty much. And as I did that, I was like, I'm not sure that what's here is in the book. Like, this book seems all about like wild transformations and people almost becoming new people that are totally personality different than who they were before. And why are people staying the same so much? And as you were just saying what you're saying, I think about that. If you want to stay the same and not have the experience that you could have with God, fine. But if you really want him, you got to lean into change.
Yep.
You got to lean into transformation. We could give it better, cooler words than just change, because change has negative things. But when you change, it's so much more powerful. You see God move. You see things happen. Families are different and completely changed. And I think that's just a very powerful part of why people connected with your message this week, is just because they know that that's what happened when they encountered God. We see in the Old Testament these encounters with God, whether the burning bush or him going by in the storm, or going by but not in the storm, and those types of encounters, and they just leave changed. There's no way around it. Or Paul and the road to Damascus, things like that. And I just want to say, like, genuinely thank you for being willing to preach that message, because no, you don't have to come back and preach another one, I guess. Maybe you don't have anything left, but I just think it's unsaid way too often. It's just unsaid. And, one of the things they would teach you to do in the corporate world is, if you take over as the CEO, fire everybody, change everything right away, because you'll just get stuck in the same thing they're already doing. And they didn't fire the last guy because they wanted you to come and do the same thing. They want you to do it differently. We don't do that in the church. We don't make those kinds of like overarching, like, hey, if you've been coming here for 2 years, you can't come anymore. We need a whole new group of people.
You won't hear that in church.
No, you won't hear that in church. No. But to some extent, we need to have some of those mindsets. And I just appreciate that from you. As you go, and you and Paula enjoy some time together, is there anything God has put right in front of you that you're really looking forward to?
We have, jumping right into activity, tonight we'll drive to Rapid City and board a plane at 6 a.m. to go to Indiana to officiate a wedding, and then we've got a few days of vacation in Florida with our kids, and then it's back to to Rapid City and responsibilities. And I don't know about another assignment at this point, but it's just fun waiting to see what God has. And so I have all kinds of plans of what I'm going to do, which are part of my retirement, which I'm not sure that I've seen yet. But very anxious to see just what God has ahead. And that's that part that I'm wired, that I mentioned, that's fun for me. That's exciting, that I don't know what is next, and I could get a call from my district superintendent and say, okay, in a week we need you here. And to me, that's just, wow, that's cool. Okay, let's do that. So there's nothing specific that we are headed towards, but very open to what God has next, even if that doesn't mean an assignment. I'm not looking for one. I'm very happy to go home and be retired. I've got plenty to do on my to-do list of things. I'm not one of those that retires and can't figure out what to do. My list is long, and so that would be just fine. But if God has a place where he needs me, I'm ready to go.
Any parting words for the podcast people? Anything you'd like to say to them at all as you go?
One thing that has seemed to be a theme that has come up several times in the time that I've been here came from one of the first messages that I preached about the Father's love for you and that you are his favorite. That whole concept that I am his favorite, and you are too, but each one of us are his favorite, that he actually values us that much. And I think a lot of Christians don't realize how valued they are by Jesus. We know we're supposed to value him, but I think we forget how much he values us. And that just came up. Actually, some of the teens reminding me and asking me, am I your favorite? Because I'd given an illustration about that God has favorites, and you are a favorite of his. And it's not favored over other people. It's just he values you that much. So that's what I would say is you're God's favorite.
Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the assignment and being with us at New Hope. It's made a huge difference. And
well, thank you for the privilege. This has been such a huge blessing being here. I can't even express how much of a blessing it has been. Everybody says, oh, you were just the right person for us, and you've been such a blessing to us. And it's like, that really goes both ways.
Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you again to Mark, and thank you to Paula for letting you come. We know how that works. And we appreciate you guys just being with us for this year. That concludes episode 155 for us. Check out the show notes. Make sure you go back and watch that sermon. It's definitely worth it. And next couple weeks are going to be a little different. Then it will be Pastor Aaron. So thank you, Mark, for all the time on the podcast. And we'll see you guys later. God bless.